People like you should know their place, Victoria spat, looking Elijah up and down with undisguised contempt. What happens when a wealthy family's daughter catches the maid's son playing her expensive piano? How will a mother's discovery of his hidden talent change everything they thought they knew about privilege, potential, and the power of music to bridge worlds? Will Elijah's extraordinary gift overcome generations of injustice, or will system that once punished him for merely touching a piano continue to hold him back? Don't miss this heartwarming story of talent discovered in the most unexpected places. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The Hartwell mansion stood tall against the morning sun, its pristine white pillars gleaming like sentinels at the entrance. Martha Johnson sighed as she adjusted her maid's uniform, her calloused hands smoothing down the fabric. At 45, her face showed the wear of years of hard work, but her eyes remained bright with determination. Elijah, baby, you don't have to come with me today. You should be resting, Martha said, glancing worriedly at her 17-year-old son. Elijah shook his head, wincing slightly as he straightened his back. It's fine, Mom. I'd rather be with you than alone at home. Martha frowned, the memory of last week's phone call from school still fresh in her mind. Ms. Reynolds, that strict music teacher, had struck Elijah across his back with a ruler when he'd sat at a piano without permission. Now, her son couldn't even sit properly without pain shooting through his spine. That woman had no right, Martha muttered under her breath. It's okay, Mom. It'll heal, Elijah said with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. As they entered through the service entrance, the magnificent sounds of Chopin filled the air. The Hartwell's daughter, Victoria, was practicing again. Martha watched as Elijah's face transformed, his pain momentarily forgotten as the music washed over him. His fingers unconsciously moved at his sides, mirroring the complex patterns of notes. Martha had noticed this since he was small, this connection to music that seemed almost magical. But lessons were expensive, and pianos were for people like the Hartwells, not for the son of a single mother who cleaned houses for a living. Remember, don't disturb Miss Victoria or touch anything in the music room, she reminded him gently. Elijah nodded, but his eyes remained fixed in the direction of the music, drawn like a moth to flame. Victoria Hartwell's fingers danced across the ivory keys of the Steinway grand piano that dominated the music room. At 18, she was the epitome of privilege, long blonde hair falling in perfect waves, designer clothes that had never known a discount rack, and a confidence that came from never being told no. Wonderful playing, Miss Victoria, Martha said as she entered to dust the room, keeping her eyes respectfully lowered. Victoria barely acknowledged her, continuing her practiced routine of Chopin's Nocturne. My recital is in 2 weeks. I need absolute quiet while I practice. From the doorway, Elijah watched, transfixed. His back throbbed, forcing him to stand straight rather than lean against the doorframe, but he couldn't tear himself away from the music. Victoria was technically proficient, he noted, but something was missing, the emotion, the soul of the piece remained untouched. Richard Hartwell strode past, his tailored suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to Elijah's worn jeans and faded t-shirt. He barely glanced at Martha, merely nodding curtly before addressing his daughter. Victoria, darling, remember the Carmichaels are coming for dinner tonight. Wear the blue dress I bought you from Paris. Yes, Daddy, Victoria replied, her playing never faltering. Richard turned and finally noticed Elijah. Why is there a boy here? He asked, not addressing Elijah directly but looking at Martha. My apologies, Mr. Hartwell. This is my son, Elijah. He's recovering from an injury and couldn't be left alone today, Martha explained, nervousness evident in her voice. Richard frowned. Keep him out of the way. And make sure he doesn't touch anything. Yes, sir, Martha replied, a flash of hurt crossing her face before she composed herself. As Richard left, Victoria smirked at Elijah before returning to her playing, deliberately increasing her volume as if to emphasize the gulf between them, she, the talented pianist with the world at her fingertips, and he, the maid's son, allowed in the house only by grudging tolerance. Elijah felt his cheeks burn with humiliation, but he remained standing, listening, his fingers silently playing along at his sides, catching corrections to her interpretation that she'd never hear from him. 3 days later, Elijah found himself alone in the magnificent music room. His mother was outside tending to the garden, and Victoria was at her weekly tennis lesson. The house was quiet, save for the distant sound of the gardener's mower. The grand piano stood in the center of the room, sunlight streaming through tall windows to illuminate it like a shrine. Elijah circled it reverently, his fingertips hovering just above the polished black surface without touching it. "Just one note," he whispered to himself, glancing nervously at the door. His finger pressed down on a single key, the perfect middle C resonating through the room. The sound hung in the air like a question waiting to be answered. Before he could stop himself, his other fingers joined in, finding their places naturally despite having never taken a formal lesson in his life. The pain in his back seemed to recede as he lost himself in Chopin's Nocturne, the same piece Victoria had been practicing, but transformed. Where her playing had been technically correct but emotionally vacant, Elijah's fingers coaxed the soul from the keys, each note carrying the weight of dreams deferred and passions hidden. So absorbed was he in the music that he didn't hear the front door open, didn't notice the footsteps approaching until it was too late. "What do you think you're doing?" Victoria's shrill voice sliced through the music like a knife. Elijah jumped up from the bench, pain shooting through his back as he moved too quickly. I'm sorry, I was just what? Touching my piano with your dirty hands?" Victoria advanced into the room, her face contorted with rage and something else. Was it fear? "How dare you? Do you know how much this costs? More than your mother makes in a year." Elijah stepped back, his face burning with shame. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean any harm." "People like you should know their place," Victoria spat, looking him up and down with undisguised contempt. "What makes you think you have any right to touch something so fine? This piano is for people with real talent, people who matter. Not for the helps brat who doesn't even know how to sit properly in class." Elijah felt each word like a physical blow. Somehow Victoria knew about his humiliation at school, about Ms. Reynolds' cruel punishment. "My mother cleans your toilets," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with malice. "Remember that before you get ideas above your station." As if summoned by her daughter's raised voice, Martha appeared at the doorway, her face falling as she took in the scene. "Elijah? What happened?" "Your son was pawing at my piano," Victoria said before Elijah could respond. "Make sure it doesn't happen again, or I'll have to tell my father." Martha's face paled, knowing what that could mean for her job, the only thing keeping a roof over their heads. "It won't happen again, Miss Victoria. I promise." As Martha led him from the room, Elijah caught a final glimpse of the piano. Despite Victoria's cruel words, despite the renewed pain in his back, he could still feel the keys beneath his fingers, still hear the music in his head. Nobody, not even Victoria Hartwell, could take that away from him. Monday morning arrived with dread hanging over Elijah like a storm cloud. His back still ached from Ms. Reynolds' discipline, making sitting in hard school chairs an exercise in torture. As he entered the music appreciation classroom, he saw her watching him with narrowed eyes, daring him to make a scene. "Mr. Johnson, take your seat," Ms. Reynolds commanded, her thin lips barely moving. "Ma'am, my back," Elijah began. "I said sit down," she cut him off. "Unless you have a doctor's note, which I highly doubt." The class tittered with nervous laughter. Elijah remained standing near his desk, face burning with humiliation. "Stubborn and disrespectful," Ms. Reynolds declared to the class. "This is what happens when students don't know their place." From the front row, Victoria Hartwell turned to give him a smug smile. Of course she'd be here, music appreciation was an easy A for someone with her training. Her presence made his humiliation complete. "Elijah. Mr. Davis, the school's music teacher, appeared at the classroom door. "May I borrow him for a moment, Ms. Reynolds?" Before she could protest, Mr. Davis had ushered Elijah into the hallway. The older black man's kind eyes crinkled with concern. "I heard what happened last week," he said quietly. "Is your back still bothering you?" Elijah nodded, fighting back tears of relief at this small kindness. "I have an ergonomic cushion in my classroom. Use it today, and I'll write you a note for tomorrow. No one should have to stand through class." "Thank you, sir." As they walked to Mr. Davis's room, the teacher asked casually, "I hear you have quite an ear for music. Ever considered lessons?" Elijah laughed bitterly. "Not really in the cards for me, sir." Mr. Davis nodded thoughtfully. "There are scholarships, you know. For talented kids without means." For a moment, hope flickered in Elijah's chest, but reality quickly extinguished it. Who would recommend him? Who would even believe in his ability? Later that day, a sleek car pulled up to the school. Elizabeth Hartwell stepped out, elegant in her casual designer wear. Unlike her daughter and husband, Elizabeth had always treated Martha with respect, and now her eyes lingered curiously on Elijah as he stood rather than sat on a bench during lunch period. "That's Martha's son," Victoria supplied with practiced disdain. "He refuses to sit like a normal person. Always needs special attention." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed slightly at her daughter's tone. "Perhaps he has a good reason," she said, watching Elijah more closely than Victoria found comfortable. Elizabeth Hartwell had not always been a wealthy man's wife. Before marrying Richard, she had been Elizabeth Morgan, a promising concert pianist whose career was cut short by a wrist injury. Now, as she supervised Martha's cleaning of the music room, she found herself reflecting on the passion she once had for her art. "Your son, Elijah, he seems like a thoughtful young man," Elizabeth commented as Martha polished the piano. Martha's hands stilled. "He is, ma'am. Smart too. Could have gone to any college with a scholarship if." She trailed off. "If?" Elizabeth prompted gently. Martha sighed. "If we had the money for the applications, for the right clothes for interviews, for all the things that make doors open easier." Elizabeth nodded, understanding more than Martha realized. She had noticed Elijah's peculiar stance at school, the way he avoided sitting down. "I couldn't help but notice he seems to be in pain." Martha's eyes shone with unshed tears. "That teacher, Ms. Reynolds, she hit him with a ruler across his back when he sat at the classroom piano without permission. Just wanted to try the keys, he said. Now he can barely sit without hurting." Elizabeth's face darkened. "That's unconscionable. Has he seen a doctor?" Martha shook her head. "Our insurance has a high deductible. I'm saving up, but..." "I've seen how he watches Victoria play," Elizabeth said, changing the subject. "Does he have an interest in music?" "Always has," Martha replied, a hint of pride breaking through her worry. "Hums complex melodies he's only heard once. Somehow knows when notes aren't right. But lessons, instruments, these things aren't for families like ours." Elizabeth's gaze drifted to the piano, an idea forming in her mind. Perhaps there was more to Martha's son than met the eye. Elizabeth arranged everything carefully. Richard was away on business, Victoria was at her friend's house preparing for an upcoming recital. The house staff had been given the afternoon off, all except Martha, who was working in the guest quarters on the opposite wing. "Elijah," Elizabeth called as she spotted the boy helping his mother carry cleaning supplies. "Would you mind helping me with something in the music room?" Martha gave an encouraging nod, and Elijah followed Elizabeth, his posture stiff from both pain and nervousness. The music room was bathed in golden afternoon light. Elizabeth sat on the small settee near the window rather than the piano bench. "Do you play?" she asked directly. Elijah's eyes widened. "No, ma'am. I've never had lessons." "That's not what I asked," Elizabeth said with gentle firmness. "Victoria mentioned finding you at the piano last week." Elijah looked down, shame coloring his cheeks. I'm sorry about that. I shouldn't have touched it without permission. The piano is an instrument meant to be played, Elizabeth said, surprising him. Would you play something for me now? With my permission? Elijah remained frozen, his eyes darting between her and the magnificent instrument. I won't tell Victoria, Elizabeth promised with a small smile. This is between us. Slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt, Elijah made his way to the piano. He hesitated before sitting on the bench, wincing slightly as his back protested. Your back still hurts, Elizabeth observed. It's better than it was, he lied. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before descending. The first few notes were tentative, uncertain. But then, like a dam breaking, music flooded the room. Debussy's Clair de Lune, played not with the technical precision of years of training but with raw, intuitive emotion that took Elizabeth's breath away. Elijah's eyes closed as his fingers found their way across the keys as if guided by some invisible force. The piece transformed under his touch, becoming something new yet faithful to its essence. When the final notes faded, silence hung in the air like a held breath. Elizabeth found herself speechless. In 30 years of music, first as a performer and then as a patron, she had rarely encountered such natural, untrained talent. How, she finally managed. How do you play like that without lessons? Elijah's hands retreated to his lap. I just hear it. In my head. I watch videos online sometimes, when we have internet. And I practice on paper keyboards I draw. Paper keyboards, Elizabeth repeated, her voice thick with emotion. Miss Hartwell, please don't tell Victoria or Mr. Hartwell. My mom needs this job, and, Elijah, Elizabeth interrupted, what happened to you, both the incident with Ms. Reynolds and Victoria's behavior, was wrong. Deeply wrong. She stood, decision made. I'd like to help you, if you'll let me. Help me? Confusion crossed his face. You have a rare gift, she said simply. And I know someone who can help develop it properly. Someone who might also help us address the injustice you've experienced. For the first time since she'd met him, Elizabeth saw hope kindle in Elijah's eyes, fragile, cautious, but unmistakably there. Will you trust me? She asked. After a moment's hesitation, Elijah nodded, unaware that this simple gesture would change the course of his life forever. Elizabeth Hartwell arrived at Westridge Academy precisely at 10 a.m., dressed in the subtle signifiers of wealth that ensured immediate respect. The school secretary, initially dismissive, quickly changed her tone upon recognizing Elizabeth's name. Mrs. Hartwell. What an unexpected pleasure. How can we help you today? I'd like to speak with Mr. Davis, the music teacher, and afterward with Ms. Reynolds. Minutes later, Elizabeth sat across from Daniel Davis in his modest classroom. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment, Mr. Davis. I'm here about Elijah Johnson. Mr. Davis's expression warmed. Elijah? Remarkable young man. His understanding of music theory exceeds many of my advanced students, despite never having formal training. You've noticed his talent then? Elizabeth asked. Impossible not to, Mr. Davis confirmed. I've tried encouraging him toward scholarships, but... He hesitated. But what? There have been obstacles. Not of Elijah's making. Elizabeth leaned forward. You mean Ms. Reynolds? Mr. Davis's silence was confirmation enough. Tell me about the incident with the ruler, Elizabeth pressed. Mr. Davis sighed deeply. Ms. Reynolds has traditional views about discipline and about which students deserve opportunities. When Elijah touched the classroom piano without permission, she struck him across the lower back with a wooden ruler. School policy prohibits corporal punishment, but Elijah never reported it officially, fearing retaliation. Elizabeth's jaw tightened. And the principal? Tends to support faculty over students, especially when the student is. Mr. Davis trailed off. Black. Elizabeth finished for him. Mr. Davis nodded grimly. Unfortunately, yes. Thank you for your candor, Elizabeth said, rising. One more question, do you know Dr. James Williams from the conservatory? Mr. Davis's eyes widened. The James Williams? Of course, though only by reputation. I'll be speaking with him about Elijah, Elizabeth said. I may need your support. Next, Elizabeth confronted Ms. Reynolds, whose smug superiority crumbled under Elizabeth's cold questioning and veiled threats of legal action. By the time Elizabeth left the school, the music teacher was pale and defensive, realizing too late the power of the woman she'd provoked. Elizabeth's final call of the day was to an old friend, Dr. James Williams, renowned pianist and head of the prestigious Williams Conservatory of Music. James, I've found someone extraordinary. A boy with raw talent like I haven't seen in decades. But he needs your expert assessment, and perhaps your help with a situation of injustice. The Hartwell breakfast room was tense the following Saturday morning. Elizabeth had barely touched her food, her mind on the day ahead. Across from her, Victoria toyed with her fruit salad while Richard scanned financial news on his tablet. I still don't understand why the cleaning woman's son is coming here on a weekend, Victoria complained. And why you invited some professor to hear him play my piano. Dr. Williams is hardly some professor, Elizabeth corrected. He's one of the most respected pianists and music educators in the country. Richard lowered his tablet. Elizabeth, I've indulged this project of yours, but I'm concerned you're overstepping. The boy is the maid's son. What exactly are you hoping to accomplish? Before Elizabeth could answer, Martha and Elijah arrived at the service entrance. Martha had dressed Elijah in his best clothes, clean jeans and a button-down shirt she'd ironed to perfection. The sight of them, trying so hard with so little, strengthened Elizabeth's resolve. Mrs. Hartwell, are you sure about this? Martha whispered when Victoria and Richard had left the room. If this goes badly. It won't, Elizabeth assured her, though anxiety fluttered in her stomach. So much depended on today. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Ms. Reynolds paced her living room, phone pressed to her ear. Principal Edwards, I'm telling you, Elizabeth Hartwell was asking questions, pointed questions about the Johnson boy and about me. She mentioned lawyers. At the school, Mr. Davis was also making calls, reaching out to former students who'd encountered similar treatment from Ms. Reynolds. If Elizabeth Hartwell was building a case, he wanted to ensure she had all the evidence she needed. Back at the mansion, the doorbell rang precisely at noon. Dr. James Williams stood on the doorstep, tall, distinguished, with gray at his temples and keen intelligence in his eyes. Elizabeth herself opened the door, breaking protocol to greet her old friend. James, thank you for coming. Your message intrigued me, he replied. You know I've heard many undiscovered prodigies over the years. Most are merely enthusiastic amateurs. This is different, Elizabeth promised. You'll see. In the music room, Elijah stood rigid with nervousness, his mother's hand on his shoulder. When Dr. Williams entered, Elijah recognized him immediately from YouTube videos he'd watched in the public library. His eyes widened with awe. You're Dr. Williams. You performed Rachmaninoff's Third at Carnegie Hall 3 years ago. Dr. Williams raised an eyebrow, impressed by the recognition. I did indeed. Elizabeth tells me you play. Not really, sir. Not properly. I've never had lessons. Let me be the judge of what's proper, Dr. Williams said kindly. Would you play something for me? Anything you choose. As Elijah settled at the piano, Martha moved to stand beside Elizabeth, both women watching with bated breath. From the doorway, unseen by the others, Victoria observed with narrowed eyes, drawn by curiosity despite herself. When Elijah began to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, time seemed to stop. His technique was unorthodox, self-taught, yet somehow he captured the emotional heart of the piece with an authenticity that formal training sometimes sacrificed. Dr. Williams's expression transformed from polite interest to astonishment, then to something deeper, recognition of a kindred spirit in music. When the final notes faded, silence filled the room until Dr. Williams spoke quietly. "Young man, where did you learn to play like that?" Elijah's fingers trembled slightly over the keys as he prepared to play his second piece. Dr. Williams had requested Bach after the Chopin, wanting to test the limits of his untrained abilities. The technical demands were different, the emotional architecture more complex. "Take your time," Dr. Williams said kindly. "Bach isn't going anywhere." From her position near the door, Martha watched her son with a mixture of terror and pride. They were so far from their normal world here, balanced on a knife's edge of possibility. One wrong note, one misstep, and this chance could vanish. Elizabeth stood beside her, a steady presence. "Breathe, Martha," she whispered. "He's extraordinary, and James can see it." As Elijah began to play the prelude in C major, his posture changed. The pain in his back seemed forgotten as he lost himself in the mathematical precision of Bach, finding the hidden poetry within the structure. Despite his lack of formal training, his innate understanding of the music shone through, an understanding that couldn't be taught, only nurtured. Dr. Williams leaned forward, his expression intense. Occasionally he nodded or closed his eyes, absorbing every nuance of Elijah's interpretation. When the piece concluded, he stood and approached the piano. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the bench. Elijah moved aside, and Dr. Williams sat down, his posture perfect from decades of training. "Watch my hands," he instructed, playing a passage from the piece Elijah had just finished. "See how I position my wrist? Try that." For 15 minutes, they worked side by side, Dr. Williams offering small corrections, Elijah absorbing the guidance like a sponge in water. It wasn't a formal lesson, but something more profound, a master recognizing potential and offering the key to unlock it. Finally, Dr. Williams turned to Elizabeth and Martha. "I've heard enough." Martha's heart sank, fearing the worst. "Mrs. Johnson," Dr. Williams continued, "your son has the most natural musical ability I've encountered in 30 years of teaching. His technique needs refinement, certainly, but his musical intuition, that cannot be taught. It's innate. Elijah hears the music as it was meant to be heard." Martha covered her mouth with her hand, tears filling her eyes. "What does this mean?" Elizabeth asked, though she already knew. "It means," Dr. Williams said, looking directly at Elijah, "that I would like to offer you a full scholarship to the preparatory program at the Williams Conservatory. Weekly lessons with me personally, theory classes, ensemble work, everything you need to develop your gift properly." Elijah stood frozen, unable to process the words. "But, how? I have school, and my back." "Your back needs medical attention," Dr. Williams said firmly. "Elizabeth has already spoken to me about that. As for school, our program works with students' academic schedules. Many of our most promising students come from diverse backgrounds, Elijah. You would not be alone." "Mom." Elijah turned to Martha, seeking guidance in this unfamiliar territory. Martha stepped forward, her voice steady despite her tears. "This is your chance, baby. The one I always prayed would come." As they discussed logistics, none of them noticed Victoria slipping away from the doorway, her face contorted with complex emotions, jealousy, confusion, and something that might, with time, become regret. The Hartwell household exploded in conflict that evening after Dr. Williams departed. Victoria stormed into the family room where Elizabeth sat with Richard, her face flushed with indignation. "You're helping him take my place," she accused, pointing a finger at her mother. "That scholarship should have been mine. I'm the one with years of training." Elizabeth remained calm. "The scholarship wasn't mine to give, Victoria. Dr. Williams made his assessment based solely on talent." "Talent?" Victoria scoffed. "He's the maid's son. He probably learned by eavesdropping on my practice sessions." Richard, who had been processing the day's events in silence, finally spoke. "Elizabeth, I have to question your judgment here. Getting involved with the Helps family, bringing strangers into our home, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking," Elizabeth replied with steel in her voice, "that extraordinary talent deserves nurturing, regardless of whose child possesses it. The argument might have continued, but they were interrupted by the arrival of Martha and Elijah, who had been summoned back to the house. Martha's expression was worried, Elijah's guarded. "You wanted to see us, Mrs. Hartwell?" Martha asked. Victoria immediately rounded on Elijah. "You think you're so special now, don't you? With your fancy scholarship and Dr. Williams's praise. But you'll never belong in that world. You'll always be the boy whose mother scrubs our toilets." Victoria. Elizabeth gasped, horrified by her daughter's cruelty. But Martha stepped forward, years of deference falling away as she defended her son. "My boy has a gift from God, Miss Victoria. A gift no amount of money could buy. I may clean your toilets, but I raised a son who understands that true worth isn't in what you own, but in what you give to the world." Richard watched this exchange with growing discomfort. He'd always seen Martha as part of the background of his life, a necessary service provider rather than a person with hopes and dreams and a brilliant son. "Mr. Hartwell," Martha continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I've worked for your family for 8 years. I've been punctual, thorough, and respectful. But I cannot continue to work in a home where my son is treated this way." Elizabeth intervened before Richard could respond. "Martha, please don't make any hasty decisions. There's something else we need to discuss." She turned to her husband and daughter. "I visited Westridge Academy yesterday. What I learned about Ms. Reynolds's treatment of Elijah was disturbing. She struck him with a ruler, hard enough to cause lasting pain, simply for touching a piano." Victoria's expression faltered, her certainty shaken. "He was probably breaking rules. The rules," Elizabeth cut in, "do not permit physical punishment. Ever. Ms. Reynolds has a history of targeting certain students, primarily students of color, for harsher treatment. Mr. Davis confirmed it, and I've spoken with other parents as well." Richard's businessman instincts kicked in as he recognized potential liability. "If what you're saying is true, that teacher should be fired." "My thoughts exactly," Elizabeth agreed. "But there's more. The school has systematically overlooked these complaints. They're facing potential legal action from multiple families, unless changes are made immediately." Victoria looked between her parents, her world tilting. "But Ms. Reynolds said Elijah was disruptive, that he lied." Elijah spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but firm. "I didn't. I never reported her because who would believe me over her? But I didn't lie." The room fell silent as Victoria truly looked at Elijah, perhaps for the first time seeing not the maid's son, but a talented young man who had suffered an injustice she unwittingly perpetuated. Richard cleared his throat. "Martha, Elijah, please accept our apologies for how you've been treated. Elizabeth is right, talent should be nurtured wherever it's found. And injustice should be corrected. It was a beginning, faltering and imperfect, but a beginning nonetheless." 6 weeks later, the recital hall at the Williams Conservatory of Music buzzed with anticipation. In the front row sat Martha Johnson in a new dress, nervous but proud. Beside her, Elizabeth Hartwell maintained a dignified calm, though her eyes sparkled with satisfaction. Richard and Victoria Hartwell occupied the seats next to her, both looking somewhat uncomfortable but present nonetheless. Principal Edwards from Westridge Academy had also been persuaded to attend, after significant pressure from the school board following Elizabeth's evidence of Ms. Reynolds's misconduct. The music teacher herself was conspicuously absent, having been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. Mr. Davis sat with several students who had come to support Elijah, their presence a quiet rebellion against years of unspoken hierarchies at the school. Dr. Williams stepped onto the stage, commanding immediate silence from the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this special showcase. Today we present a new student whose extraordinary talent reminds us why we dedicate our lives to music education." Behind the curtain, Elijah took deep breaths, trying to calm his racing heart. The past weeks had been transformative. A specialist had diagnosed and treated the injury to his back, prescribed physical therapy, and given him exercises that had significantly reduced his pain. Daily lessons with Dr. Williams had refined his technique while honoring his natural interpretative gifts. And today, he would play for an audience for the first time. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Elijah Johnson, performing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The applause was polite as Elijah walked onto the stage. He spotted his mother in the front row, saw her tears and her smile. He acknowledged Dr. Williams with a nod of gratitude, then sat at the magnificent grand piano, a far cry from the paper keyboard he practiced on for years. When he began to play, the audience ceased to exist. There was only the music, flowing through him like a river finding its true course after years of diversion. His fingers, now properly trained but retaining their natural instinct, brought forth sounds that filled the hall with emotion, joy, sorrow, yearning, triumph. In the audience, Victoria watched with complex emotions churning inside her. Her own recital the previous week had been technically flawless but had received only lukewarm acclaim. Now, witnessing Elijah's performance, she began to understand what her playing lacked, the soulful connection he achieved effortlessly. Richard Hartwell, not typically moved by classical music, found himself leaning forward in his seat, captivated by the performance. The boy he'd dismissed as the helped son was creating something of undeniable value and beauty. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of silence before the audience erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, including, after a moment's hesitation, Victoria. Dr. Williams returned to the stage as the applause continued. Ladies and gentlemen, as some of you may know, our conservatory offers one full scholarship each year to our most promising new talent. Today, I am pleased to announce that Elijah Johnson will receive not only the Williams Scholarship but also support for his college education and continued medical care for his injury. Martha covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed by blessing after years of struggle. Principal Edwards shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Dr. Williams continued, "This talent might have been lost due to institutional failures and individual cruelty. Let this be a reminder that our responsibility as educators extends beyond teaching notes on a page. We must nurture the human spirit behind the music." The pointed remark was not lost on anyone present, least of all Victoria, who suddenly understood her unwitting role in a system that had nearly crushed an extraordinary gift. 1 year later, the Hartwell Mansion's music room witnessed a very different scene. Elijah sat at the piano, the same piano he'd once been forbidden to touch, giving Victoria pointers on interpretation of a Debussy piece. "Feel the water in it," he suggested. Debussy was painting with sound. Victoria nodded, her previous hostility replaced by grudging respect that had, over months of interaction, evolved into a genuine, if tentative, friendship. In the doorway, Elizabeth and Martha watched their children with shared satisfaction. "He's thriving at the conservatory," Martha said softly. "Dr. Williams says he's ready for his first competition next month." Elizabeth smiled. "And how are you enjoying your new position at the foundation?" After the events of the previous year, Richard Hartwell, partly from genuine remorse, partly from his wife's firm insistence, had created a position for Martha at the Hartwell Family Foundation, overseeing programs that supported arts education in underserved communities. Her perspective as both a parent and someone who had faced barriers to access had proven invaluable. "It's challenging," Martha admitted. "But good. Really good." Ms. Reynolds had not returned to Westridge Academy. The investigation Elizabeth initiated had uncovered a pattern of discriminatory behavior that could no longer be ignored. Mr. Davis had been appointed interim department chair for performing arts, implementing changes to make music education more accessible to all students. Richard entered the music room, pausing briefly to listen to Elijah and Victoria playing a duet, their hands moving in tandem across the keys, creating harmony from what had once been discord. "We should leave soon if we're going to make Elijah's recital," he reminded them. As they prepared to depart, Elijah approached Martha, embracing her tightly. "Thank you, Mom. For everything." Martha touched his face gently. "I always knew you were meant for more than what the world tried to limit you to." Dr. Williams was waiting for them at the conservatory, his face lighting up at the sight of his star pupil. "Ready to shine, Elijah?" Elijah nodded, confidence replacing the fear that had once defined him. As he walked onto the stage and the spotlight found him, he sent a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had guided his fingers to those forbidden keys 1 year ago. The music began, and with it, the next chapter of a story still being written, one note at a time. Dear friend, this story reminds us that talent knows no socio-economic boundaries, yet opportunity remains unequally distributed. Every day, extraordinary gifts go undiscovered because of prejudice, lack of resources, or systemic barriers. We must create a world where all children can develop their potential, regardless of their background or the color of their skin. By sharing stories like Elijah's, we highlight the importance of recognizing and nurturing talent wherever it's found. If this message resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more content that celebrates triumph over adversity and reminds us of our power to create positive change, one life at a time.